the economic psychology of black nationalism or African nationalism. And of course I'd have to do a schematic kind of thing today because the subject is a very broad one, and obviously in order to give its due we would need much, much more time than we are allotted here today. But I want to emphasize the necessity of economic development for the liberation and advancement of our people. And I think that this is the major task for our current generation. I think each generation has a task that it has to accomplish. Sort of like a relay race in the sense where each generation carries the ball, the baton, a certain distance, and then it is handed on to the next, and the next generation must carry it a distance as well. And I think it becomes interesting to take a schematic look at the history of our people and kind of see how this baton of liberation and advancement of our people has moved thus far up to this point. You look, of course, and I think looking at it this way will help us to be charitable sometimes to our ancestors, who sometimes we are a little harsh on in terms of what they didn't do and how they didn't see certain things. And we have to recognize that each generation does have its blind spots, and ours will have its spots as well. But we must do what we can within our vision. And it is the duty of the following one then to expand that vision and to continue. I can understand why then, in a sense, our ancestors, while in slavery, thought that emancipation would be almost the end-all and be-all for them. And why emancipation would represent, in Martin Luther King's words, free at last. A type of ultimate freedom. And it's understandable being under such a system of oppression and servitude that one's vision would be locked on almost the more obvious solution, and that is to break out from under that system. And yet when emancipation was finally accomplished on a certain level, after the period of elation and celebration was over, the inadequacies of that stage of development was becoming apparent. We had then Reconstruction, which in a way then concentrated on a bit of economic and social development of black people and the political development of black people as well. And to a degree, it contributed to the growth and development of black political movement and economic movement and development. However, it had its limitations. The limitations of needing the support of its former slave masters to maintain itself. The limitation that we still suffer from today. And that limitation is that it's all right to have laws, civil rights laws and other kinds of laws, as I will speak a bit about a little later on. But those laws cannot ultimately provide protection for people. It's all right to be backed by the federal government and the power of the federal government as our people were during Reconstruction. But what happens when the federal government gives up its support of the laws and of the systems? And we see that Reconstruction, of course, this is exactly what happened. When the federal government gave up its support of its own so-called laws and rules and regulations, then, in a sense, the freedom of the black man was abridged even more so than before. And there was a period following then of almost of semi-slavery in the form of sharecropping and sort of what we might call wage slavery, followed by Jim Crowism and a type of accommodation to white power, an accommodation to segregation. In a way, while that was bad, it had some other sides to it as well. The development, of course, of some black institutions and of black community, and of course of sharpening the consciousness of many of our people to understand the situation that they were in and to try to strive for solutions to that situation. And of course there were a number of proposed solutions besides the one of accommodation, which we found, of course, still did not give us the freedom and independence and liberation that we desired. The forces that seemingly won the day were the assimilationist forces, the desegregationist forces, the forces under the Du Boises, the NAACP, those forces that still hold sway today, that in a sense sold us a dream, the kind of dream that Martin Luther King sold us as well. The idea being then that the ultimate freedom would be achieved through integration, through assimilation with our former slave masters. That the ultimate dream of freedom and survival and security and respect could be gained through the passing of civil rights laws. And that the ultimate liberation could be attained then when we were able to get whites not to look at us in terms of the color of our skin and in the famous statement of Martin Luther King, but in the content of our character. A very pleasing kind of dream. Apparently it struck the hearts of many of our people because we bought it for a long time. And in a sense, you see the rhetoric of King being profound as it was, because apparently it struck a very deep chord in many of our people. And in many ways we can't say that King was wrong from a logical point of view, or the assimilationists were wrong from a logical point of view. But we have to recognize that their language, in a sense, had a propositional assumption under it, that if-then kind of assumption. And that is the problem. Any proposition can be true if you grant that the premises are true. You see? And this is something we often forget. If white folk did not see us as black people, then, little black boys and white girls could hold hands. If white folks did not segregate against us, then we could enjoy the fruits of the society. If they could love us as they love themselves, then we would not have job and racial discrimination, and we could live where we wanted to live, and we could travel the way we want to travel, and we could achieve the way we want to achieve in the society, and we could stop being self-conscious about ourselves, and we can love ourselves and all that. But we often forget that this is propositional language. If this is the case, then that could be the case. But often we got so caught up with the possibilities of the ifs coming true until we were literally hypnotized by the glittering dream and images held up before our eyes. And many of us were caught up in the images of little black boys and white girls and so forth holding hands. And we got caught up in the so-called beauty of living next door to whites and the beauty of not being self-conscious about ourselves. And it was a wonderful, wonderful dream. And it was so wonderful until often people forgot to consider some other ifs. and look at some other possibilities as well. What if they never loved us? What if they could not forget what color we were? You see? What happens then? And this is the major problem I find with the assimilationist philosophy. If what you say comes to be true, well, maybe I wouldn't have too much of a problem with that, but what about the other ifs? It's all right to talk about integration, but let's also talk about disintegration. That word is often forgotten. We were only permitted to hear the term integration and we were hypnotized by it. Integration, integration, integration. And there was a belief by many of our leaders that once integration was achieved and assimilation was achieved, that they would become a permanent state of existence. And there is no law that guarantees that once you're integrated, that integration from that point on shall last forever. There's no guarantee of that at all. And yet there were many leaders who sort of left us with this vague impression and presented this as something that would be the true case. I often mention this idea in terms of the context of marriage, when people are in love. You know, and when you're first in love and you think that you'll never have an argument, you think you'll never be able to, you'll never have a fight, and you'll always be sharing and loving to each other until somebody loses a job and falls under the stress of unemployment or gets other kinds of interest. And we see that in marital relationships that start out so blissfully and with so much promise fall apart because of economic and other kinds of changes that occur in that relationship. There are many women today who are still suffering from this starry-eyed kind of approach to marriage, who dream the old fairy tale dream of marrying the white knight, the prince, who would take her away from the drudgery of working, and who would marry her because of her beauty and her poise. And therefore she could spend all of her time working on her seductive characteristics, shopping and going to the beauty parlor and buying her clothes and doing all of these kinds of things. And finally she lands that prize, only to find that at some point and for some reason he leaves. And she's faced then with the fact that she's never been employed. She never prepared herself to carry on on her own, to care for her own family. Some women, particularly in the past, were left in such a condition they didn't even know how to write a checkbook or how to pay the telephone bills and things like this because of this kind of romantic concept that once married, once in love, it shall last forever. You know, and the song serenaded us to that, didn't it? When I fall in love, it will be forever. Sort of, it makes me think of the assimilationists. Once we get these whites to love us, it will be forever. You know? And that's not necessarily the case. Even if, you see, and we forgot to think about, even if we were to achieve this integration, if whites were to forget about our color, if they were to knock down the barriers and treat us equal to themselves, what would happen if that one day were to change? If they, like an unfaithful husband, deserted or left? Did that remove from us the responsibility for ourselves, the responsibility for developing our own power, for developing our own independence, for developing our ability to see to our survival and our advancement, and our ability to advance our own interests. Unfortunately, in many ways, the assimilationists sold us this kind of program that, in a sense, indicated that we could be relieved of the responsibility of building a culture and a nation and a group coherence that could provide for our survival when and if it was necessary to do so. They sort of misled us into thinking that once we got these people to love us, then they would sort of take care of us. And they would provide for us. They would be good husbands. In a sense, assimilationist philosophy, to me, is similar to the old feminist philosophy, you see, of marrying the persons and marrying into a protective relationship. So if you married a strong man, if you married a wealthy man, if you married into his family and so forth, that then would provide for your continuing security. And in a sense, we saw this rich, white, and powerful society, and we were seduced into thinking if we were to marry into it, then our troubles would be over. And of course, this typically means that many of our potentials, our intellectual potentials, our organizational potentials and so forth, were left undeveloped. Just as many intellectual and other potentials of females were left underdeveloped under the old feminist concept. Why should I learn to think, and why should I learn to take care of myself when all I need to do is marry a good man? You see? And so consequently then, it happens then that some of our sisters did not develop their intellectual characteristics and other parts of their character because of this paternalistic kind of approach to life. And the danger with the assimilationist position is a very similar one. It indicates then, why should we develop a Pan-Africanist organization and relationship when if we just get in and marry these white folk, they'll take care of all our business for us. We don't have to worry about it. We can glorify good old individualism and just let it go at that. We don't even have to worry about defense because a white man in defending himself is going to defend us. We don't have to worry about making bread for ourselves because a white man making bread for himself is going to make bread for us. See? So all we have to do is seduce him into loving us and working on his guilt complex and nagging him a bit and keeping him in shape, you see. A typical feminist, old feminist concept. You reduce the more powerful persons and being through manipulating their guilt, their moral obligations. You know, we see a lot during the 60s, right? Moral suasion. Speaking to the humanity in these other people, ultimately converting them, which is a typical ploy of a weak person in relationship to one of strength. You know, to try to convert the stronger in some sort of way or other, rather than building up their own power and their own development, you see. So you still get this feminist, and I'm speaking of that in the old sense. I hope you note that, ladies. I'm not speaking of the current approach, but in the old approach, which, of course, women were the first ultimately to recognize work to their disadvantage and are about changing at this very time, and came to recognize that that old approach through the use of seduction and using one's weakness for strength is not going to secure the liberation and induce the development of the potentials of the females. And of course then we as people must recognize a similar thing in our own circumstance. So being dazzled by the dream, we forgot to ask the question, what would happen if, after all of this beautiful relationship we have with these people, for some reason or other they decide to divorce us? And we, in the meanwhile, having been so caught up in the romance of being loved by such powerful people and so-called beautiful people and so forth, we neglected to develop our own potentials. We neglected to organize ourselves. And we neglected to prepare for the possibility that the divorce would occur. So you see, it is now the task of our generation to look beyond the dream and ask that what if question. We see the white man today struggling for his own existence. I was telling an audience last week, PTA in Queens here, as a matter of fact, that you're worried about being equal to white children, and the white man is worried about the fact that his children are not equal to the Japanese. So you're worried about being equal to the people themselves who are in a losing struggle. So after you get equal to him, you'll still find that you're going to be still in an inferior position. It is time to look beyond the white man even as a point, a standard of measurement. We must prepare to compete with many ethnic groups. The white man is not the only ethnic group we have to compete with at all. In fact, by the time we get online, he may not be worth competing with. And if he is in the struggle for his own existence, and his own existence is in jeopardy, you know then that his concern for our existence is going to become less and less, and in fact, he will become even more hostile to our existence. You know, in the old days, when the price of cotton would go down, the number of lynchings of black people would go up. And there was a correlation between the drop in the price of cotton and the lynching of black people. You see, this foolish belief of the white man as a god is a part of that dream, you see. The stupid belief that the white man somehow, because we've gone to all of these movies and read all of these books and believe all of this propaganda where the white man always wins. And so since these are our white folk, we just feel like they're going to win all the time. And therefore we figure as long as we're connected to them, we always going to be on the winning side. There's no guarantee of that at all. And I think the current struggle with the Japanese and the Koreans and other people are beginning to demonstrate that very, very clearly. That these people are not necessarily all-time winners. And we have to look at that very closely. We have to recognize the fact that civilizations come and go, and they rise and fall. And the white man is not going to get an exemption from this cyclic nature of civilizations any more than we got an exemption from it. Our civilizations occurred first and laid the foundations for the ones that are here today. And yet they passed away. And we look back, we look at Greek civilizations and Roman civilizations and others, and they come and they bloom and they go. I guess it's a common belief, though, for those people who are parts of those civilizations to believe that somehow theirs is going to escape. You know, the wheel of karma. Somehow, I could imagine the Greeks thought that theirs were going to escape, you know, and the Romans somehow thought that theirs was going to go on forever. And of course, we are caught up in this one, and somehow we figure, you know, that these people are going to come out of it all right. There's no guarantee of that at all. As a matter of fact, when we look on the horizon, then we see the waning of the European civilization. And the major question for us as Africans, as I've put it before a number of audiences, is, are we now going to struggle after some hundreds of years to get out from under the power of the European only to fall under the power of the Asian? Is it it going to be now another couple thousand years that we're going to be under the thumb or the foot of the Asian? And I think when we look at our communities, we begin to see the very first forebodings of that kind of thing. This is why our generation is so crucially important. Because it's how we perform as a generation that's going to answer that question. Are we going to subject our children and generations of our grandchildren to the domination not of Europeans, but to the domination of Asians? Do not let the word third world throw you and deceive you. A lot of us want to throw a lot of different interests under that term. And it makes many of us think that that makes us all alike. You know, Latins and blacks and Indians and this. It's a terrible mistake to think in those terms. We as African people will have to compete against South America too. Face it, I know it's unpleasant. You cannot just include people simply because they are non-white into your own associations. The Japanese will be our competitors and our competitors already. And therefore we have to recognize the fact that in the world the way it is currently constituted, we ultimately have to compete against a number of groups of people. Not just whites, but Asians, Latin Americans, and others as well. And while we use the rhetoric third world, and we can identify on many levels with other so-called third world people, we must not let that blind us to the realities of our situations. And to the fact that Japan and other Asians will dominate us as well as any other group. And we have to prepare for that eventuality. And therefore our competition and our struggles should not be just against these rights, but we have to look on a global level at things. We've become too obsessed by rights anyway. We permitted rights to fill our vision and block us from seeing what else is going on in the world. And this will be to our detriment if we continue to do this kind of thing. This assimilation has made us think that once we got the civil rights laws, everything would be all right. A very fatal way of thinking. I was reviewing last Sunday with sons and daughters in Harlem somewhat the so-called state of the African today, and I was looking, of course, at the Africans in America, and you look at the contradictions. We have the equal housing laws, and what is our major problem today? Housing. Homelessness. What's going on here? You get the law in the books, you got a Human Rights Commission, and the whole bit, and the major problem is homelessness. With the law in the book, by the way. We got desegregated schools, a bunch of white teachers. Law does not protect anyone. The law doesn't protect anyone, ladies and gentlemen. A law is a bunch of words written on a page. Protects nothing. Guarantees nothing. It is only the enforcement of the law that determines freedom and liberation. You can write as many laws on the books if you want to. If those laws are not enforced by the powers that be, then you may as well not have any laws. So we neglected in our thinking the whole concept of power. The idea being that the whites passed the law and therefore somehow they would become subject to the law that they passed. And their ability to pass the law indicates their ability to do what? Rise above it. To unpass it if they want to. To not enforce it if they wish to. I saw in the New York Times the other day the black gentleman that resigned from one federal agency. What was the reason? Because the Reagan administration is refusing to what? Enforce the laws. And the only thing he can do is resign in frustration, and his name will soon be forgotten. Headline one day. Because the ultimate thing is the power, not law. Because it is the powerful that what? Make the law and enforce the law. And the idea then that in a moment of weakness and guilt, you can make a bunch of people pass laws, and that these laws, quote unquote, are going to protect you, is one that is in the end somewhat nonsensical. And it's this belief that, as I've told people before, if it happens one day that the white man has to make a choice between feeding his children and feeding ours, no civil rights law is going to guarantee that our children get fed. You can quote the law all you want to. None whatsoever. And it can be that way one day, ladies and gentlemen. We don't know. Some change in climate, some blight in the agricultural area. We have germ warfare being developed today where a release of bacteria or release of some germ could literally wipe the bread out for this whole nation within a very short period of time. You see, there's suspicion that AIDS is an artificially created disease. Some of you might have heard me talking on Bob Law's show one evening about how 23 universities in this country were dedicated to creating new diseases. That the function of medical doctors is not merely that of curing diseases, but of making diseases. You must understand that every profession and every institution in a society functions to maintain that society. And it operates as a two-edged sword. It can go backwards and forwards. And therefore, the function of the medical establishment is not merely to cure diseases, but to create diseases as well. And you will find that many medical schools engage in the development of germ warfare. And many American universities, including also the New York, Board of Health. Very much concerned with it. As I've told many people before, the university is there to maintain a society. It's only there secondarily to give people jobs. And it gives people the jobs and maintain the society. But you must not think of the university as a place where you get a job and you're able to buy a little house later on the corner. The ultimate function of the university is to provide the culture with knowledge and technology and information and so forth to maintain and advance the interests of that culture. And therefore it is out of MIT and Princeton and Yale and Harvard and Caltech and all the others that the atomic bombs and hydrogen bombs and satellite programs and Star Wars and all of these systems that are used to maintain the power of this country will flow from. And the principal function of their professors is to do research for the United States of America and for European interests. And they only secondarily teach students and prepare students for jobs. That is their function. And consequently then you will see universities and professors involved in the development of death machines of all types. And I won't get off into that at this point, except to say, that education under the European system is a sickness. It is being educated into craziness and madness. told you before that the most dangerous people in the world are educated people. That it will not be the people out here selling crack that will destroy you. It won't be the muggers that destroy you. It will be PhDs who have made weapons that will rain down on you from 500 and 600 and 1,000 miles in space that will bring an end to your life and an end to all life. These very people that you hold up as examples, who are the paragons of honesty and good citizenship, who go out of their two-car garages and make research on how to kill people that are going to bring an end to the world. But of course they focus our attention on minor cases. The dope men on the corner. Not that they don't need to be dealt with. Don't get me wrong. They do. But you have to also look at the bigger picture here of what is going on in the education. And what am I saying here then? Suppose the Russians release a germ in the breadbasket of the United States. And we one day will be begging for bread. Or other kinds of things can happen. And there has to be a choice then between the survival of the Europeans and survival of Africans in this country. A breakdown of economic systems is notorious for bringing a breakdown in social organization, a breakdown in law, and a breakdown in order. And this is what you will be confronted with. A breakdown in the economic system of this country will bring down breakdowns in other areas, and therefore you will not be able to call upon the law to protect you. You will have to only be able to call upon whatever power you have within yourself to protect your own interests as a people. So while the integrationist dream may come true, and while we may enjoy the fruits of integration, we can still never forget the other possibilities. And we must still prepare for those other possibilities, because that's the wise thing to do. You see? And consequently then, whether assimilationism is your goal or whatever is your goal, the ultimate idea of being prepared to secure one's own survival should still be at the center of focus. The preparation for various contentions, what ifs, still have to be at the center of one's thinking. And so ultimately, whatever political direction you may decide to take, in the end you got to look beyond the dream and deal with the what ifs and prepare yourself to deal with those things. So we have to know then, while looking at the contributions of those who've gone on before us, we have to now expand the vision. And I am a great admirer of Martin Luther King. I looked again, and it's hard for me to look at those programs and not be filled with with sympathy and a love for this man. Doesn't say I can't criticize or look objectively at the situation. Because see, some people get you wrong. They think if you say a crooked, you don't like him. No, that's not it at all. He is no different from all of us. All of our visions are limited. My vision is limited. I am no God. We are not gods. We cannot see the total future. And despite the fact that I may disagree in some instances with the goals of his program and those who have taken after him, I still must admire his willingness to sacrifice his very life to the achievement of those goals, and to give up so many things to go after it. And I challenge black nationalists who have great ideas and great, concepts, and were very heavy on the analyses and the critical thinking to make a similar sacrifice and put your own self out there the way things do. You cannot assure that you will pass on to the next generation the right concepts. You try it as hard as you can. And that's all we're called on to do. We try very much to see reality for what it is. And we look in it, and it's our duty to think and look and search and try as hard as we can to see reality and be objective. But even with all of our trying, we miss sometimes. But we can pass on to them the fighting spirit, our will, our willingness to sacrifice for what we believe was right, and our willingness to forgo some of the so-called pleasures and other things of this world to accomplish our goals. Because without that will, great intellectual dreams and critical analyses will come to nothing. And we have some nationalists think that their job is done when they run a great lecture and that is filled with keen insight. That's just the beginning. In fact, that is the accompaniment of work, not the end point